follow-up question to you, Andres. When we talk about on your presentation, you mentioned communities and local. Who are, when it comes to the social, the S on the ESG, who are the key players? Do you think it's more a local, a regional? Who are the communities? Who are the sort of the gatekeepers that we can think about this ESG? Can you tell us a little bit about the work on mining and your experience on how to liaise with communities? Is this something that is straightforward?
Yes. No, just to reply quickly. Let me just something. Well, I think we have seen this. I think, Jerry, you have the. Okay. I think that it's important that municipal governments take more ownership and capacity to deal with these activities, to try to coordinate the activities that companies do. In different case studies, we have the impression that sometimes communities create a relationship with companies as if companies were the government and replace government activities. And that shouldn't be the case, because these investments are long-term, 20, 50 years, but are not forever. So who takes probably the ownership of making a long-term plan with these investments should be the municipal government. They have tools like land use planning, coordination with other municipalities, with the regional government, with the national policies. So I think that is probably one of the most important takeaways.
Thank you very much. So now to our second speaker, Verónica de la Cerda, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Enrique. Let me put my, I'm going to put my clock here, not to use more of your time. So thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you very much, Enrique and Andres, for inviting us here. And we really appreciate being included. Let me start maybe explaining what CMPC does very briefly and where we are located, because of course it makes a lot of importance in terms of our ESG strategy. We actually work indeed in the forest sector, but we do much more than that. We produce and market wood, pulp, packaging, paper, tissue, and personal care products. So we produce them and market them. We have plantations, but we also have pulp factories, mills, paper and packaging plants, all of this in 3 countries, Chile, Brazil, and Argentina. And then we have as well tissues and personal care facilities in 8 countries around Latin America. Talking about plantation, pulp, and mills, we have 1.3 approximately million hectares of forest assets, 30% of which are actually conservation and protection areas, and the other 70% are used for plantations. And these are spread around the south of Chile, the south of Brazil, from Rio Grande do Sul, and some in Argentina. But the main ones are in the south of Chile and the south of Brazil. In terms of ESG, CMPC has established sustainability goals across all aspects of its operations. Since 2017, the company has measured its baseline performance in environmental, social, and governance areas. These have given us a lot of data. With this data, we have been able to set up a specific and, for us, rather ambitious targets. Then the rest could actually evaluate that. So sustainability is included in one of our 5 pillars for our corporate strategy for 2030. We want to be an industry leader on sustainability and an agent of change for social development. So here we're starting to link what we do with the topic of this panel. But then when you are a company, you really don't know where to put your focus, right? And of course, you need to put your focus on what's your material impacts and align them to the local communities. So we actually, in 2022, we reviewed our double materiality process, which included all stakeholders to determine our ESG and financial materiality for our business. And there we confirm where we've been putting our focus. So to briefly sum it up, because of course there are a lot of different issues to address, but if we're talking about environment, for example, of course, emissions, effluents, biodiversity, among many others, are part of our issues. And for that, we have strategies, commitments, and roadmaps. For example, we launched last year our nature and conservation and biodiversity strategy. We are also committed to becoming net zero by 2040. We have our emission reduction targets validated by science, so the SBTi. But also there are other issues, like, for example, water. And we have very ambitious goals for reducing water usage on our plants. But there's as well this other part that has to do with the water sources that are either born or pass through our forests, and how we take care of them for the communities to actually use them. Because this is very essential for the communities where we are. So that is also an area where we are very focused. I didn't mention, but almost 100% of our forest assets are actually certified by FSC or PFSC, which also, of course, comes with a lot of focus on traceability among our value chain, which as well, for me, for example, has a lot of impact on social development on the local areas, right? Like putting our suppliers in a traceability track, it's very important. Then, of course, there are other issues, and social issues are very important. And we work a lot, Andres mentioned education. We work a lot on education. We have a foundation actually only focused for that. But then we as well have other issues, and let me just, mention a couple of them, which are shared value creation and community relations. Both of them, on my view, are very, very relevant for understanding what the local communities need and how to actually create development in those local areas. So in Chile, for example, we have a very difficult, we have a very centralized country. So it's not easy to bring development to the local areas because you pay taxes on a country level, right? And Chile is a very concentrated country in terms of the center of Chile. So there we have a commitment to participate with the local government. So you were talking about land use planning, municipalities, but here in Chile you have a level that is the government between like a bit broader than municipal level, but yet smaller than country level, which is gobernadores. And we work very closely with them to understand how to create value on those specific territories. Then we also have a strong commitment on participating with the communities as part of them, more like a neighbor, and engage with them as well as with the local governments to understand what should we be working on and where should our priorities be. We have we develop a community engagement framework with 7 areas of value creation that are very aligned with what the local communities need. We work closely with local suppliers. We actually have a special policy for that, especially in the forest area. We promote local entrepreneurship and create the value chains necessary to put those products into the market. So we have a very important project, both one in Brazil and one in Chile, regarding local suppliers, but also local products and how to bring them to bigger markets. Another thing that probably sometimes is not as it's not said as important and probably should be, and it's a conversation that I know that probably you in the OECD have already been having, but it's all about the forest and ecosystemic services. So how can we, with our plantations, bring different types of local engagement and value creation in a very local level. You have to remember that our business, when you're talking about forests, it's a 25-year-long business. So how can you actually create a more short-term value for the local territories? And we, for example, I don't know, we have different types of projects. That one could be helping local beekeepers to produce honey in Sarah plantations, for example, or other ones that are opening our plantations for communities to actually use them in recreational areas. We have a project called, in English, it would be Live Forests, which is precisely that, creating an area for people to have access to nature, because you could sometimes be surprised how sometimes those communities that have all these great settings don't necessarily have access to nature. So we open part of our plantations for people to actually have a recreational moment, let's say, in there and use them for their day-to-day lives. So of course, there are many other things that we can do and that we are doing. But I leave the floor to the next panelist, because we also have, and this is very important, a lot to learn. So I would love to hear, and I'm very interested in hearing your experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Veronica, and thanks also for sticking on the time. Much appreciated. I know you have to leave at 15, so maybe I can take the liberty to ask 1 or 2 questions to make sure that we hear from you. I'm quite very interested on what you mentioned on this shared value creation and working with communities, because of course, as you mentioned, each communities have their different needs. Some of it is a bit more tacit. You talk with the people, they tell you something. Other times it can be a bit more quantifiable. So my question to you is, do you use the same criteria to monitor progress? Do you use data? How do you ensure that you're getting closer to the goals? And how do you report that information back to other people? So I'm quite interested on that aspect.
Yeah, it's a challenge, Enrique, because so all communities have different needs. Of course, you have certain things in our industry that are like obvious. For example, we have to get trucks into the forest, and these create some noise, for example, and you have to deal with those things and be a good neighbor. So, and probably those are things that or impacts that you have to deal everywhere, right? But then you have the local government. So maybe 2 things. One thing is working very closely with these governors, and that is very important. Be a part of that community, and it's a challenge, Enrique, because in countries like Chile, for example, it's not easy. Like, companies are registered in Santiago de Chile, like the capital. That is our level of engagement normally. So you have to work with the local governments where you are, and that may seem sometimes obvious, but it's not necessarily easy to do. So it requires, we have a big team working on the community engagement and community relations. But then in terms of data, what we for many years just worked like, okay, these are the demands, let's work on them. But now we have a platform, we have a digital platform helping us not only manage our engagement, but also try to measure what the impacts have been. So one of the drivers for this was actually like to take our commitments seriously and into action, and guarantee that all the commitments that we make for the communities are actually done. But again, then you have all the measurements, and we're also working on a system that is much broader when we're working with a university here in Chile to understand how all of the different things that we're doing have an impact on a human development level. So it's called it's like human development framework. And we are developing, understanding the needs in a more macro level and how our small actions are creating or not an impact on those layers. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes, thank you so much. That's very interesting. Maybe just a very short, because you mentioned several times the regional level and the governor as being your main partner. Is that the case? I'm quite surprised that such a centralized country, you are already engaging with the governor and not the central authorities. And how about the local level? Do you also have a lot of work with them, or?
Yes. Yeah. You mean like local, like municipalities or even smaller? Yes, of course. And you have to work with the community, I don't know how to say them in English, but the communities of neighbors, the municipalities as well. And of course, this is something that you have to do very wisely, because you don't want to, I mean, being a big company as well, you have to be aware of lobbying and a lot of things. So you have to work very closely, very transparently. That is something very important nowadays, I think.
Thank you very much. Again, if you have to leave, just leave, and I'll pass it to our third speaker. Please, James, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. So just firstly, can everybody hear me okay? I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm presenting and pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. So just thank you. It's a great privilege to be joining you from the Shire of Coolgardie. It's a little town in the Goldfields region, but we certainly are batting above our weight. So we're the centre of Australia's largest mining infrastructure, transport growth. The Shire of Coolgardie is known as the mother of the goldfields. Regional councils in Australia play an important role in the area of economic development, community education, employment, and environmental protection. So just to put some context, the Shire of Coolgardie contributes in 2022-23 $5.2 billion to the state economy, which for small local governments are pretty significant. And we have significant mining stakeholders, Mineral Resources, Karora Resources, Goldfields Australia, St Ives, Evolution Mining, Focus Minerals and Develop. So with the price of gold that it is at the moment and the strength of lithium with Mineral Resources, we find ourselves in an amazing position. What the Shire's done is developed an ESG model, and we've realigned our community strategic plan. And it's interesting that Andreas talked earlier about the community. So we are taking leadership. The Shire of Coolgardie has taken leadership locally. So if you actually think about local government, we do deliver ESG because we provide services and we provide leadership, policy and planning. So under a true ESG model, local government is at the centre of it. And you can see our ESG models built with our pillars: an inclusive, safe and vibrant community, a thriving local economy, effective management, and our partners being industry, government, and all of the above. Just quickly, we've developed an ESG framework, which you can see there, and certainly areas of aligned interest: increased investment, enhanced local communities, higher performing operations, strong governance and significant connection to local community and our First Nations community. So certainly our local government would be a first, certainly in Australia, and we believe in the Southern Hemisphere in terms of developing an ESG framework and aligning our community strategic plan and our long-term financial plan under ESG and under the pillars of ESG opportunities and investment. So our framework: environmental focus, certainly on green mining, circular economy, how we deal with energy, water and zero waste. Social focus in terms of certainly Aboriginal community development, elderly care and the youth, community programs, community infrastructure, and obviously from a governance focus, transparency, compliance, and proactive disclosure. So ESG commitments, as everyone knows, it's all about critical and important partnerships and the existence of how strong those are. So the Shire of Coolgardie, the mining sector that underpins everything we do, allied industries, the support and commitment from state and federal government. So we obviously work very closely with state and federal government. And what we do find is that the mining sector and state and federal government are very comfortable with working with us as a local government, because if the mining sector is delivering the objectives that are set by the local government and the leaders in the local government, then they're meeting requirements from a state and federal perspective and vice versa, and working closely with our community groups and obviously our education institutions like TAFE schools and universities. So benefits of what we're doing and in our region, and if I talk about circular economy and green mining, it's put Coolgardie on the world map, creating greater opportunities. You can see I've talked about multi-sectoral collaboration, leveraging financial and knowledge commitment, and we found how much knowledge there is within our community, which is valuable capital, and valuable investment into what we're doing. Integrate energy, water, waste and climate, building capacity and expertise in Coolgardie, both at a community level and at a state level and federal level, and the integration of the mining sector into helping with us, and they've truly become integrated into the community. And a good example of that is that we've built a 300-person accommodation village for the mining sector right in the middle of town. They're integrated. They go to the gym, they use the pool, they use the local pub, they use the shopping centre. So it's a true example of how you can work together and collaborate. So look, that's that for me. And I suppose if I look at things, the Shire of Coolgardie's taken ownership. We're advancing the local agenda. The companies are part of the community. We're building local resilience, and we're future-proofing the Shire. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James, and thanks again for being with us at such a late time in Australia. If I can have a question, you talked about these partnerships involving the Shire, the state universities. Who makes these partnerships work? Is it led by local governments, by the firms? Can you tell us a little bit of how these partnerships are who's the trigger? Or do they happen naturally, or is there like something that is
It has to be the local government. So we've worked for 4 years on building that relationship and that partnership with the mining sector and state and federal government. So we've worked very hard to do that. We've probably invested, from a local perspective, probably $1.5 million in terms of time and effort, workshops, meetings, and everything to do that, to form the partnership. So it has to be driven at a local level. And the way we've approached it is we've gone to the mining sector and said, how can you help us, and how can we help you? Or how can we help you, and how can you help us? Has to be driven at a local level. No other way of doing it.
Thank you very much. So now we go with our last speaker in this first panel, Thanasis, please, the floor is yours.
I would like to congratulate the organizers for the initiative to organize this webinar, and to thank again for inviting me to speak about ESG criteria, which is a part of the sustainability context, but I would like to present some issues that are coming from my experience working for the mining industry the last 43 years in Greece and abroad. Just as a reminder, I would like to say that minerals are here in order to serve the mankind, being vital constitute of our body, marking the civilization, being at the starting point of a lot of everyday products, and of course, last but not least, energy transition, decarbonization, green and new technologies are all mineral intensive. So going now to the three pillars of ESG for environment, as Andres said already, two are the main challenges. One is care for biodiversity, and here in Greece, both on Milos Island and also the area of the central Greece for bauxite mining, Imeris owns nurseries for local species reproduction, which is not an easy issue. Local species reintroduction at the field, and now we can be proud that we use exclusively local species for the rehabilitation projects, and now the rehabilitation is better and much cost effective because all species are sustainable and resilient to the local conditions. And going beyond revegetation, now we are in the so-called post-mining land use era. Just an example of a restored perlite mine in Milos Island, where Imeris planted 22,000 vines of local Cyclades varieties in an area of 65,000 square meters. And this is going beyond the just reclamation according to the legislation obligation. Is just to create a new financial activity within the multiply benefits for Milos, encourage Milos residents to begin again using more environmentally friendly farming methods, and of course, attract visitors by wine production linked culture, hospitality, quality, and tradition. Socially, we think that the biggest challenge is to create a common shared development vision. Here is the motto of Imeris on Milos. In order to secure our long-term operation in Milos, we must act as a socially responsible corporate citizen, contributing to the balanced development of the island, thus ensuring social acceptance and the support of the local communities. And for this purpose, we created or we used some vehicles as Milos Mining Museum, Miloterrain and GeoWorks, Milos Festival, operating Milos Conference Center, which is a restored old kaolin processing plant, Milos Initiative, which is a common company with Milos Municipality, and we'll come back to this, and of course Trachyllas vineyards, for which I already discussed. Resolving a long-standing pressing social issue is the construction and the commission of the wastewater treatment plant in a touristic Cyclades island as it is Milos. Milos Initiative SA is a joint company, not profit company, established in 2007, and in 1.5 years we resolved a pressing issue which was standing there for more than 25 years. We resolved this by using this tool just in 1.5 years from the concept till the operation. So, discussing for a shared vision, solving pressing issues, and of course in Greece, we managed locally, both in Milos and Itea area, to turn the antagonistic relationship between tourism and minerals business to a complementary relationship. And now, instead of mining activity to be seen as an evil, now is seen as a source of competitive advantage. And you can see here Vagoneto Mining Park, which lies in the central part of Greece, where Andres and his team visited 2 months ago. We created the Vagoneto Mining Park, an underground thematic park in a real underground gallery. And this is a complementary product to the local tourism, where the most attractive pole is Delphi. And regarding governance, I would say that we share the motto of it does not matter what you do, it is also how do you do. And that's why we encourage and we have Zimmer's code of business conduct and ethics, anti-bribery procedure, antitrust procedures, conflict of interest management procedures, personal data protection, and last but not least, speak up and we listen. It is everybody to have the ability to say what we're not doing well and the company then to undertake actions. So I grab the opportunity just to present a pickup of some case studies that we apply mainly in Greece and of course on business conduct worldwide for Imeris. Thank you for your attention and I remain to your availability for the discussion further down.
Thank you very much, Thanasis, for this very interesting presentation. Perhaps I'll pick up a question that has been directed to you by some of the participants, wanting to know how you ensure that the company investments in tourism are maintained by the municipality, and how do you deal with political cycles and changing political affairs? I don't know if you have any views on these.
Yeah, I will start from the second fold. As we have developed a shared vision for the development, we are out of the political and the voting cycle, because it is a part of the will and the willingness of the local community. As far as the maintenance, it is an issue. For some of this infrastructure, like Milos Mining Museum, we keep as an our property and as a contribution to the local touristic product, or some of them are given back to the municipality, as is the waste water treatment plant, and they take care, but still we are there in order to ensure that the maintenance is taken part regularly, and if there is some need, we offer either know-how or from time to time some monetary support.
Thank you very much. And I know we're running a bit out of time, so if it's okay with everybody, I'd like to proceed with the second panel, and perhaps at the end, if we have some additional minutes, we can open up for all the speakers to some interesting questions. So with that said, I'll proceed very quickly. The second panel is titled "Implementing and Monitoring ESG with Communities and Indigenous People." So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to our first speaker, Benjamin Katz, Sector Leader on Responsible Business Conduct from the Directorate of Financial and Enterprise Affairs from the OECD. Please, Benjamin, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks so much, Enrique. Thanks for having me, to CFE colleagues and all the great speakers today. And I think a nice segue also with Thanasis's intervention to responsible business conduct. I'll just put up some slides here. Try not to for people to drown in slides here, but just to give you a little bit of context about the work that we do here in the Center for Responsible Business Conduct. And hopefully now you can see clearly the slides. So in the Center for Responsible Business Conduct, we've negotiated a series of standards that are backed by OECD member governments, as well as other adherent countries, and indeed many countries outside of the OECD on responsible business conduct that relate to both cross-sectoral RBC issues, as well as specifically in the minerals sector. So all this stems originally from the guidelines for multinational enterprises that dates back to the 1970s. The OECD was tasked by the UN Security Council in about 15 years ago with negotiating a guidance based on the M&E guidelines, but that would focus on supply chain due diligence in the context of the conflict in the Great Lakes region of Africa. So already here we're working in, I think, what sounds like a somewhat different context than many of the projects that we've been discussing here today. So the minerals due diligence guidance is certainly focused on geographies and risks that tend to arise in very fragile settings, in high-risk areas. And what it does is it provides a set of recommendations to companies to conduct supply chain due diligence in order to identify what risks they may be tied to in their supply chains, and then in order to mitigate those risks, how to track progress on mitigating those risks, and also provides recommendations on audits in order to check that progress. What risks are we talking about here? We're talking about conflict financing, so how minerals might and mining and the minerals trade might contribute to financing armed groups involved in civil or international conflicts. We're talking about financial crime, including corruption and bribery, as well as serious human rights and security risks, for example, management of security forces around mine sites. And so it provides this 5-step framework in order to address these risks. We have some other instruments as well in this as part of the RBC framework. There's a guidance on stakeholder engagement in the extractives, which also relates to a lot of these kinds of situations. And then there are a set of FAQs and handbooks in order to support implementation of these standards. So there's an FAQ on corruption. There's a document called the Practical Actions on Mitigating Child Labor Risks in Mineral Supply Chains. And there's also an environmental due diligence handbook that we published last September in order to supplement the guidance, the minerals guidance, the fact that it's really focused only on those core risks. And then these instruments have been integrated into a range of different regulations and market requirements around the world. So some of that is soft law, some of that is exchange requirements, for example, like those of the London Metal Exchange requiring supply chain due diligence based on these OECD standards. Some is in hard regulations and laws. So in the EU's conflict minerals regulation, as well as in the US Dodd-Frank Act, and several laws in the DRC and in DR Congo as well. And this is gradually building up a kind of architecture for global implementation of due diligence. And of course, there are two sides to this that I think really relate to the topic at hand today. One is on mitigating those potential adverse impacts as a foundation for sustainable development. And the other is really actively contributing to sustainable development in mining regions. One of the new developments that we are navigating and trying to help mineral producing countries, especially those most fragile ones, try to navigate as well, is in emerging partnerships on so-called critical minerals. So minerals that are really considered to be critical to energy transition and digital technologies that are really considered to be in demand, especially by OECD, but many other countries as well. And some of the issue that we're facing when it comes to responsible business conduct is we have mineral producing countries aspiring to attract greater investment and move up the value chain. So to not only extract and to export mineral ore, but also to process, to refine that ore, and perhaps at some point even move into original equipment manufacturing. But we're facing a challenge attracting that investment because of corruption, integrity, conflict risks that a lot of companies just do not feel equipped to address in a lot of high-risk areas. And that's where we're trying to put our instruments to use in a different context. So trying to embed our standards into supply partnerships between often very fragile countries and developed countries in order to help companies actually engage instead of simply avoiding high-risk areas, but to engage positively. So to be able to address those risks, and that may entail escalating issues when they do arise, to try to improve governance of extractives, and ultimately lay that foundation for more sustainable, broad-based development. I also wanted to touch on, a bit of an anecdote when it comes to the way that we apply our standards and really how it connects to regional development. This is a screenshot, a satellite image of the city of Kolwezi in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. More than half of the cobalt that's produced, that's critical to everything from EVs, everything that uses batteries, all those kinds of technologies, come from the region around Kolwezi. So that's a huge share of global supply. And as you can see, mines are simply interwoven into the urban fabric. So it's a city of about 500,000 people, very rapidly growing. You can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's literally a neighborhood pretty much smack in the middle of the city that was simply uprooted to make way for a new mine called Kasulo. And of course, how the DRC, how the regional authorities deal with this situation and try to put in place long-term planning with strong stakeholder engagement by companies, that's really going to make or break to what extent the country can benefit from this rush to procure so-called critical minerals. And that's where we're hopeful, although I think we're really only at the beginning of seeing how these partnerships that I mentioned between countries like the DRC and so far the US and the EU, as well as Japan and France, how these partnerships can develop to actually put in place a lasting framework for broad-based economic development, as opposed to kind of a cut and run extractivist approach. So thanks a lot. I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Very interesting presentation. Just perhaps a question you mentioned about auditing and enforcing in your presentation. Can you tell us a little bit about all these guidelines? Who is doing the whistleblowing or the enforcement, and in particular, what's the role of local communities in this process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Enrique. And I think it really comes down to the nature of the regulation or the requirement. And it really varies a great deal across regions and segments of the supply chain. What we call for in the guidance itself is an audit at the control point in the supply chain. So that's where it tapers to relatively few suppliers. And that's typically at the smelter refiner. So there's a lot of the most throughput goes to relatively few suppliers at that segment of the supply chain. And that approach, to varying extents, has been integrated into legislation. For example, in the EU conflict minerals regulation, many of the checks, the enforcement mechanisms relate to audits taking place at that part of the supply chain. But it can vary a great deal because in the DRC, for example, while there are smelters and refiners in copper and cobalt, there aren't in tin, tungsten, and tantalum, those supply chains that are most closely associated with conflict financing risks. And in that case, they're looking at what we call Step 5 reports. So those are the annual disclosures that companies are recommended to issue based on our guidance. The London Metal Exchange then takes a somewhat different approach. They're looking at a mix of disclosures. They're looking at their brands, which often are smelters and refiners, participating in a joint industry scheme that carries out audits. So there are a few different approaches to carry it out. One of the institutional linkages that I think has lent the guidance some teeth when it comes to enforcement is the fact that often when countries end up on the gray list of the Financial Action Task Force, one of the recommendations is to bring more supply chain transparency to the gold and precious metals sector. And our guidance is kind of like a ready-made way to address that recommendation. Of course, the FATF gray list can increase borrowing costs, can have a lot of second-order effects in countries. So that's another source of kind of enforcement teeth.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation and points you made. I'll just continue, I think, to our second speaker, since we are a bit under time pressure. We have with us Leonard Rickert, the president and CEO of the Siksika Group of Companies in Alberta, Canada. Please, Leonard, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. Again, my name is Leonard Rickert. I have a longstanding career in economic development focused on Indigenous inclusion. I've spent a better part of a decade plus in the mining sector with a focus on diamond and gold mining. Where I'll start off is by providing some context with ESG implementation and monitoring in the Canadian context. The region of Canada that I'm from is in Northern Ontario, the Western James Bay region, a long-standing history with European contact, beginning in the mid-1600s. And over the last century, our region has seen extensive resource development, whether that be in hydroelectric generation, forestry, mining itself, railway development. All of these things have led to a long history between our Indigenous communities and various industries. I'll say, generally speaking, over the last century, you've seen very little Indigenous inclusion in the development of those resources, of that vital national infrastructure. However, in the last few decades, we've also seen the emergence or recognition of Indigenous peoples as rights holders when it comes to resource development, particularly in the mining space. We've seen our constitutionally protected rights come to the forefront of the decision-making process, particularly when it comes to approvals processes. This also coincides with an era, at least here in Canada, around economic reconciliation. In around 2011, 2012, Canada went through a Truth and Reconciliation initiative. And coming from that over the last decade, we've seen a heavy emphasis on this idea of economic reconciliation. What does that mean in practice for the mining industry? Practically speaking, it's forced the mining industry to really have a heavy emphasis on how it engages with Indigenous communities, particularly in light of their role as rights holders, not simply stakeholders in that industry. From an on-the-ground perspective, how has that practically played out? I'm thinking about the role of Indigenous communities evolving from simple bystanders and passive participants in the mining sector, where we were simply viewed as a source of labor to operate mines, to more recently an emphasis on Indigenous communities being an active part of skilled labor supply. From an ESG perspective, around mine planning, active participation and collaboration around future-looking perspectives, particularly around mine closure. Coming back to examples on the mine planning aspects, I'm thinking about one mining operation I was involved in where we tapped into local Indigenous knowledge to help guide the location and design of various aspects of our mining operation. And, you know, with the use of Indigenous local knowledge, we were able to identify an area that we had planned on building mine infrastructure on as being an important caribou calving ground. The effect of that resulted in our ability to remove and relocate that piece of infrastructure But that's a very concrete example of that intersection of Indigenous knowledge and mine design. During that period, I think the mining company I was working for at that point in time was also heavily reminded that while we were technically focused on how best to operate our mine, we also realized that Indigenous engagement was the single most important non-technical risk to our mining operation, and thus informed how we would engage with communities, Indigenous communities, how we viewed our current operations against a much longer term and perhaps more holistic approach to our effect on the local environment. And we were bluntly reminded by our community partners that while we had an outlook of 30, 40 years in front of us, we were constantly reminded that they would be here beyond that point in time. They would be there utilizing the reclaimed mining site. And it was important to them from that perspective that as we implemented various environmental commitments and monitored against how we were implementing those commitments, it was important for us to engage, be inclusive in that process. And that included everything from pre-submission permit review, participation in the actual permit approval process, but also identifying shortcomings in the regulatory approval process. One of the comments made to me in those days was around, at least in the Canadian and Ontario context, the heavy emphasis on socioeconomic impact assessments. And one of the shortcomings we had realized during that engagement process and the request explicitly being made by communities, Indigenous communities, was the importance to focus on cultural impacts. One example of that would be the effective brain drain of communities based off of what we thought was a positive metric. We saw that our local employment rate for Indigenous employees was about 25% of our overall labor force. One of the unintended consequences of creating that employment and providing long-term employment for community members was the relocation of those same employees to urban centers. And again, Northern Ontario is a relatively rural and remote area. And we actively saw our employees leaving their First Nation home communities, relocating to urban centers, which I'm sure you can appreciate the economic effect of that relocation effort. All in all, I mean, these were all helpful examples for us to better understand the effect of our activities and plans on local Indigenous communities. And to that end, when it came to ESG reporting, we had a multi-level process to ensure that what we were reporting to the public and the markets on was actually reflective of how those activities and outcomes were perceived by the local communities. And to that end, we also had implemented internal or company community collaboration on the design of those reports, meaning that we would verify with them. So if we reported a 25% community employment rate, we'd actually share that data with them, verify it with them. There's a lot of collaboration. Certainly, I think at times it also felt a little a level of tension, but I think that was healthy in keeping us on our toes and ensuring that we were reporting the right data and continuously tracking that on an annual basis. I'm happy to say that that mine continues to operate and continues to be a significant contributor to local employment. But certainly, I think was a test case for the growing sophistication of Indigenous communities and how they engage with the mining industry. And to that end, I think we were on the forefront of a lot of industry national changes in how Indigenous communities conducted themselves, the growing sophistication of Indigenous communities. And perhaps something we didn't necessarily anticipate was the growing alignment between NGOs and Indigenous communities to advocate for better mining practices. I'm sure you can imagine that that provided a level of tension that, again, I would view as a healthy tension that, again, kept us on our toes. But something, at least in the Canadian context, that was really quite helpful for us to anticipate future developments and how we engage with Indigenous communities. I think one of the things that we have yet to see the full growth in the ESG perspective is the role of First Nation communities on the governance side. Certainly, we saw interaction between our board of directors, key management, and Indigenous community elected leadership. I think we're going to see more growth around how Indigenous communities potentially participate in the ownership of various mining assets. I know that we've seen some emphasis here in Canada on resource revenue sharing. I think we're seeing a growing demand for First Nation participation in board governance. But ultimately, I think that'll culminate in First Nation ownership of mining assets. And I know there's examples here and there, but I don't think that's fully realized yet. And hopefully, as from a reporting perspective, as agreements between industry and communities evolve, we'll see more enhanced First Nation ownership and governance as well. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much. Very interesting points. Just briefly on the engagement with Indigenous communities, because in fact there's several of them. You know, and how did you go around this engagement process? Did you have a point of contact? Was it more at the federal level? Was it at the state level? Was it at the community level? And in terms of the engagement, our work with Indigenous communities, a lot of their complaints is that the engagement process is done often too late. So how did you go about reaching them and early in the process and treating them as partners in this endeavor?
I think it's often said early engagement is really critical to developing positive long-term working relationships. At least in the Canadian context, you know, we took it is a delegated engagement on the mining approvals process. From a pragmatic perspective, I think it's really important for industry to get in there early, cultivate those relationships. In the mining examples I'm referring to, we had very structured and formal and defined relationships with the communities, meaning that by way of the impact benefit agreements, the participation agreements that we'd had, they clearly define the roles and obligations of industry and our First Nation partners and our Métis partners as well about how we would engage, the frequency of engagement, and on what topics we would do. So for us, it was actually quite a robust engagement process, meaning that there were dedicated communication channels for things on environmental issues, employment, business development, engage what we would call chief-to-chief dialogue, meaning our chief executive alongside the elected leadership of Indigenous communities would meet on a regular basis, discuss high-level issues. But most importantly, we had these implementation committees that were responsible for overseeing the day-to-day implementation of our agreements and overseeing the effects of our activities. As an example, if there was a spill of a critical supply on a local highway, we would provide emergency reporting. But overall, it was a very structured and formal engagement process that was funded by industry.
Thank you very much. With that said, we'll go with our third speaker, Jari Rantapelkonen, is the mayor of the municipality of Sodankylä in Finland. And apologies for my mispronunciation, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. Very nice to be here, and welcome to Sodankylä. You can see a landscape from Sodankylä in this picture, and we are very proud of our nature here. And according to the latest studies, which was published last week, we have the cleanest air in the world, so we are very proud of that. And what kind of place is Sodankylä is? A few words about that. We are located here in northern Finland, and in a way we are also lucky in that sense that the location is in the greenstone belt. So we have lots of minerals here in this municipality, and this municipality is the second largest in Finland. We are covering over 12,000 square kilometers.
Sorry, if you can move your presentation.
I think you need to put it in full screen.
I am running full screen now.
But we don't see the full screen. We see just the.
Okay, it's on the full screen mode here. Not sure I can stop the share.
But you have
switch to presenter view.
Yeah, you have two
There's
monitors.
an option at the top left
Let's see,
of the Zoom.
top left. Yes. Can you see the,
But once you are sharing,
Great, great. Yeah, now.
is it okay now?
Perfect.
Okay, so this is it's a place for where we have lots of minerals here. And what can you say about the few words about the Sodankylä is that we have an average temperature below 0 degrees Celsius. So it's winter is 6 months here. So we have very short summertime here. But like I said, that we have lots of minerals here in Sodankylä. It's most of the area is still underexplored. Despite that, we have a running mine currently. We have a Kevitsa mine which has nickel copper, and it's owned by the Boliden mine company. But we have found 2 world-class deposits. One is for the gold mine about 35 kilometers from here where I'm now, and Sakatti, which has a nickel copper deposit. It's owned by the Anglo-American. It's about 45 kilometers in different direction here. So that's the place we are currently here. And here is another picture of Sodankylä. This is actually 300 meters from my place currently. And we have lots of rivers here. So you can imagine that the nature is #1 value for all the people that we have here. Nature is very important for well-being of people. It's also a place that the people get the food. And 50% of our population has a license to hunt. So it's also in the interest of the municipality policy to support the use of local food here. Local food means fish, reindeer meat, also berries, and everything that is living on the nature here. So that's very important for us. And when we think about the local people, it's interesting that over 70% of local inhabitants support the mines here. And but we have to keep in mind that we are supporting the mines here if the mine companies are thinking about these ESG factors and sustainability issues. That's the policy of our municipality here. And when we think about the social acceptance of mines and these issues in practice, the key interest of the municipality is to involve local people for planning the environment and also involvement in decision making here. And actually it's in the Finnish law, it's written in the law that the municipalities have to involve the people very much, more and more. And the last 10 years, it has changed a lot, the law, that the people have to be involved with the most important decisions made in the municipality. So we have made a different kind of possibilities offered for the people, and the people have also make ideas that how can they involve with the questions of mine issues here, because the mine issues is it's tied to the environment, it's tied to the nature, and the nature, like I said, it's the key issue here, because people are still living according to the if you are on January, it's different time. People are doing different things in January than, for example, in the summertime. But still, they are living from the nature. We have different kind of development working groups. It's also written in our strategic plan. Every second year, we will make a special mine questionnaire for the people. And according to that questionnaire, actually, it has a little bit decreased this support for the mines in the last 2 years and the last 4 years, but not much. But it's a little bit going down. But still, more than 70% support to mines. We are in the only municipality in Finland which has a special mine program in municipality, and that mine program was made not only together with the local people here, but it also, we have involved our companies, also mine companies have a possibility to influence our mine program, and different kind of societies that make a well-being for the local people here. So there are always ongoing possibilities to make different kind of initiatives by the local people, and they have a different kind of statement rights for use of land, because the land is, we have a very various kind of vitality and entrepreneur structure in Sodankylä. So there are different kind of interests in the same area. For example, the mine companies, reindeer issues, traveling business, and that kind of thing. So we think that although it's a very emotional issue in practice, we are very good on having a different kind of interest on the same go around the table and have a good collaboration. But the mine companies are also very active on making a different kind of collaboration and cooperation with municipality and the local villages and people here. So we are very pleased of that, of course. And we are especially pleased that they have carbon neutral aims in the strategic goals that those mine companies who are active here. But of course, they are paying a lot of taxes. That some of them are coming to directly for the municipality. They are making lots of investments here. That's one of the factors that, of course, affects that how much we like those mine businesses here, and so on. And so these ESG factors and criteria have raised in the last 10 years in a strategic role what the municipality is doing, what kind of municipality policy recommendations we have here for the local companies, and also in operational practices, they have a big role here in Sodankylä. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was my presentation, and if you have any time, please come and visit Sodankylä. It's a great place to live.
Dear Jari, from the picture that you've shown, I'm sure that more than one would love to go and visit that beautiful nature that you're showing us. Just a couple of very quick follow-up questions. How do you, as a mayor, how do you ensure a bit more coordination amongst the different ESG strategies that each individual firm has on social corporate responsibility? Do you try to align and make some win-win situations? Do you treat each of them as individually? And then another question that was asked is around engagement with indigenous communities, the Sami. Do you have any at all or not?
Yes, thank you very much. This ESG issue is very important. Like I said, when we build up our municipality strategy, so we build it together with the local people. And this idea actually came from the local people, that we have to consider these economical, societal, and governmental issues as in a sustainable way, not just in the old way that we have managed the business maybe 20 years ago. So they come from the local people, and we have a different kind of methods to work with the specific groups themselves, for example, reindeer herding people. And then we are having different working groups with mine companies. But then we have always open occasions that everybody are around the same table. And that's the most important discussion moment, to figure out everyone that we have different interests and we can collaborate and put them together. That's interesting. But also, like I didn't say that that we have also indigenous people here in Sodankylä, and it's we have actually a borderline, some kind of borderline where the Sami people are living. We have 4 municipalities, the most northern municipalities in Finland that has Sami people here, which is the only indigenous people in Europe, I guess. So northern part of Sodankylä has Sami people, and so far we have made a recommendation for the municipality that and the actors of the municipality that so far we are not going to plan any kind of mine activities in the Sami region. So that's the policy recommendation so far. So we have taken into the consideration they wish in our municipality policy.
Thank you very much. And now, without further ado, we'll go to our last speaker of the session, Stefan De Bruyn, Director of External Affairs of SQM in Chile. Please, I know we're running a bit short of time, but take your 7-8 minutes because the discussions are very, very interesting indeed.
Yes, thank you, and congratulations also on the initiative. It's a great honor to be here. Impressive number of topics has already been addressed, and I'll try to bring in a view from SQM side. So let me share this full screen. I hope I can make it work. I'll skip the initial slides, but I want to start with a quick zoom out because I hear often this focus on the critical minerals and the energy transition, and I think we forget 2 important things. First of all, why we need that energy transition, and second of all is the tremendous difference between those transition minerals and metals and fossil sources of energy. And I share here a graph from the Energy Transitions Commission, which is a very big think tank, multi-stakeholder, where you see the cumulative demand till 2050 of all the transition minerals and metals in the bright colors. And in the back, in the gray, you see 1 year of coal mining. And so we have to bear in mind that what we're replacing is of another scale of magnitude entirely. And additionally, all these transition minerals, they won't be sustainable unless we have renewable energy, which they will aim also to provide, but also unless we have recycling. But that recycling is a fundamental difference to the fossil fuels that we're trying to reduce our dependency on, and is something we should keep in mind. Very quick slide on SQM. So we're the main lithium and iodine producer in the world, also very important production of specialty fertilizers. And just to give you a snapshot of the lithium market in the world, and this is coming from an OECD IGF publication. The draft is already publicly available on pricing of lithium. And so you see on the left that Australia was the #1 lithium producer from mining extraction point of view. Chile was #2 and China was #3. And then on the right, you can see the major lithium miners ranked according to their mining output. Some of them are much bigger because they do a lot more refining. But I think this table is trying to show the vertical integration, which in the end, it's important where the materials come from as well. Where we produce is in the north of Chile. I'm currently here in the Salar de Atacama Basin. It's a very vast area. So if you look at the whole basin, it's about 8,000 square kilometers. If you look at the nucleus, which is here, the area in brown, where you can see the evaporation ponds, that is about 3,000 square kilometers. As a company, in 2020, we have set ourselves very ambitious sustainability goals. Part of our sustainable development plan, these encompass water reductions, brine extraction reductions, carbon neutrality, waste reductions, and a whole scheme of certifications. You have a lot of the programs we're working with here below. I'm not going to go into them in detail for time reason. And then, of course, I have to explain 2 things. First of all, our concession is leased from the Chilean government, so we are a public-private partnership. We started in the early 90s. There is another lithium company neighboring us here at the bottom of the Salar, which started in the 80s. And then on the eastern side of the Salar, living on the side and the foot of the Andes Mountain, are indigenous communities, also to the south, the north of the Salar, it's about 11,000 people, half of them identify as indigenous, and specifically in the San Pedro de Atacama district, the administrative area, 1 in 3 considers themselves Licanantai, which are the indigenous people original from the basin, which settled here probably around 10,000 years ago. Very important, I know that in the media there is always accusation that lithium mining is taking away fresh water from indigenous communities. That is physically impossible for the simple reason that local communities live higher up from the Salar, and they live from fresh water coming down from the snowmelt from the top of the Andes Plateau through small canyons, and they have actually settled there because of that natural occurrence of water. And so they have access to the water first before it moves further down, infiltrates underground, and that's where we use some water in the basin. There's a very important distinction here. Local communities, because of their cosmovision, prefer not to pump and extract things from the earth. They want to live from surface water and natural springs. And that's, of course, different from what we do as a mining company. And that explains you immediately the dilemma that we face in this basin. Local communities are also suffering from global warming. There's a long-term drought in Chile, creating many challenges throughout the country. And that is most likely caused by global warming. And then at the same time, our operation is around 30 kilometers away from the nearest communities. We're mining there in what they consider their ancestral land. And that, of course, is a dilemma. But I do see a lot of willingness by all parties involved, the government, the operators, the local communities, the regulators, and agencies to work towards solutions. And so I'll dive a little bit into what are possible solutions. Mentioned frequently already in this webinar is transparency. And so what we do is underground. It's very abstract for people. It's very difficult to understand. It's a mix of chemistry, physics, geology, water systems, and how they interact. We have, since the start of our operation, an environmental monitoring system that was upgraded in 2006. And all the results, including the historic ones of this monitoring system, are publicly available at the website you can see here. And so you can dive in, see what is the depletion rates of the brine, what is the evolution and the state of the lagoons, chemical analysis, everything is there. And we are trying to be as transparent as we can. What you can also see there, and these are the results of our sustainable development plan. So we have made significant strides there. We are last year operated at 30% below our allowed brine extraction rate, according to the environmental permit. And for the past 4 years, we are actually operating at below half of the authorized water extractions that we are allowed in the Salar. If you now take the stakeholder perspective and you associate all the water extracted, including the water that is contained in the brine, and you attribute that fully to lithium, this is wrong because we're also a very important producer of potassium. So that would mean that my potassium colleagues could say that they have water neutral potassium. That's of course not correct. But even if you take the position of the stakeholders, and it's a valid perception, then you see that if you combine the reductions on extraction at site level with the expansions that we achieved in our refinery in Antofagasta by the Pacific Ocean, actually the perceived water intensity was reduced by already 2/3. And so that is very encouraging. Obviously, that is not enough. We know we need to go further, and we're counting on implementing new technologies like DLE, mechanical evaporation, hopefully also reinjection, to further reduce that water footprint, and coming towards the concerns of the stakeholders. If you take the scientific way to look at this, and you look at life cycle assessment, is now quite generally documented that the lithium produced in Salar de Atacama has not only the lowest carbon footprint, but actually also the lowest water footprint and energy footprint. So we know we are producing sustainable lithium, conditional to recycling in the future, compared to other lithium production sites in the world. Then, of course, it's about governance as well. We are ranked as the leading lithium producer by a number of ESG raters. I show you two here. I want to draw your attention to the social score here by S&P Global. So we are the best in the chemical industry, best in class on social according to their metrics. And that is very, very different of the perception that is out there. Is that a wonderful news? No, it shows that we're trying to do the right thing. We know we have to do a lot more things. And this is a work that you have to earn and build a relationship and the trust every day. So it's an ongoing effort. But I wanted to highlight this. And as a result of this, we are also in the DJSI World Index this year. How can you go further in addressing the concerns of local stakeholders? We decided to undergo an IRMA audit. This is the most robust and rigorous mining assurance standard in the world. We were the first lithium site to achieve IRMA 75. Again, I'm not saying that to highlight the score. What is important is the difference between 100 and the score, and that is the gap that we have to close in each of the chapters of IRMA towards better mining. Then local value creation. So we are part of this public-private partnership. The government negotiated with the operators in the period of 2015-2018 to update the lease agreements and modernize them, prepare them for what's coming, the transition and the boom of mineral demand. And so from 2018, we have a progressive value sharing, which means that as the price of lithium goes up, there is progressively more value sharing towards Chile and towards the regional stakeholders. You can see here the different regional contributions in the past 6 years since the update is more than $400 million, which was allocated and which is used and going to be used for investments by those stakeholders in their future life plan. If you look at the contributions overall, so including what we pay to the state as lease fee or rent, there you can see that we have contributed more than $5.5 billion just as value sharing. So that excludes all the value that we're adding locally with people that we are working with, suppliers, local employment, and so on. And then as a final example of working with communities, I want to highlight this project we did with AMA. Atacama is the Alliance of Atacamanian Women. It's a project to support Atacamanian women. It originated during COVID because we saw the women in the basin were particularly affected as they were, of course, depending a lot also on tourism and the local handicrafts that are being sold to tourists. And so we wanted to do a project, microfinancing amongst others. But one of the subjects that was touched in this process is that there was a need from the local people to understand better why the lithium is needed. And as a company, your initial reaction is always to say, okay, I'm happy to explain to you. But they made it very clear to us that they did more explanations. They wanted to see for themselves. And so we took a group of women on a road trip through Europe, visiting LG battery plant in Wrocław, a Volkswagen EV production plant in Germany, a recycling center, to bring them to the stakeholders and to give them a voice and also to let them learn by themselves. And that was a very powerful experience. And I think this is the way to go forward in this. And I thank you very much and leave it there.
No, thank you very much, Stefan. And I know that we're running a couple of minutes late, so that's due to all the very interesting discussions that each of you have shared with us today. But maybe before we go into the closing remarks, just a quick follow-up question: do you have any information in terms of the social acceptance? For example, the one that we heard from the mayor.
Hearing the question at the moment. Sorry, Enrique, could you repeat? I'm going to cut my camera.
Have you run any surveys? Do you have any sense of what percentage of the indigenous communities in the Atacama are welcoming mining? I know that you showed us some numbers around employment in the company that are indigenous, but
the question, well, so you're asking about surveys, Enrique?
Yeah. Do you have any figures of how many what percentage of the indigenous communities have a welcome view of mining activities? Do you have any sense of the magnitude of this or not?
Yes, I'm going to try to put my camera back on. Hopefully, if the signal is bad, let me know. So as part of the IRMA audit, you undergo an OECD human rights due diligence assessment, which includes an impact assessment. And when we announced our plan for further reducing the water impact and the perceived impact, you could see that the perception of the water is very strong, both in the indigenous communities, but even in our own workforce and our suppliers. And so we have numbers of that. I don't have those specific numbers in my mind at the moment, but it's a very mixed perception. Some people, and that's then typically the people that work in the operation who know the operation better, they tend to be more positive, and that's about 240 people, indigenous people that work in our operations today in Salar de Atacama. But then you also have people that are still very opposed to mining because they stick very strongly to their cosmovision, and we have to acknowledge and respect that and see how we can work to come towards to what they want. So it's mixed, but having said that, I think we see definitely a very positive evolution in the last 5 years, where let's say the reluctance to engage with SQM is really decreasing. And we have a lot of engagement initiatives. I visited one yesterday, which is a mobile dental practice program. We have 3 dental trucks that move around the basin. We have done 20,000 dental interventions in 3 years' time. And that allows a lot of engagement with people and showing that we really want to be a responsible actor here.
Thank you very much. I know that we're past our time. I know that we have a request by Nicolas to make you wanted to make a very brief input. Nicolas, please.
Sure, I'll try and be brief. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. No, thanks so much. Just as a way of context, I lead a regional development program here in the Andean region, focused in mining regions from the German Development Corporation. And the topics that we discussed today, I think, are very relevant to our project. And I just wanted to give you one input from our findings, because what we do here is, on one hand, try to promote responsible supply chains. So what does that mean? How can you measure that? And on the other hand, we're also working in mining regions to work on local development plans and trying to figure out how the mining sector can contribute to those. And what we found here in the region over the last decade, I would say, is that there's a shift of thinking of mining companies to say, okay, previously our focus was on employment, procurement, to today also looking at other development indicators and other development outcomes at the regional municipal level, like have been presented today in this forum. But one thing that we still see a bit of a delink is essentially the incentives that ESG monitoring data gives in terms of comparability with doing the correct things in context-specific environments that are in mining regions, right? So that is very interesting to also see now the presentations of the different mining companies, of how they try to combine matrices that are often used to compare companies and ESG matrices, but at the same time respond to the demands of the territories in which they operate. And what we found is also that probably a mix of data used, like perception data with hard data, is the way to go to kind of allow for that mix between context specificity of the territory and hard data that investors or off-takers use to compare operations. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you very much. Very good point in addition to the overall discussion. As much as I would have loved to now open another panel, unfortunately, we were a little bit late out of time. So apologies from our side for taking a bit longer than we anticipated. I'm supposed to give some concluding remarks. I'll be very short and brief. A couple of things that come to my mind from today's discussion. I think it's been really rich. I myself learned quite a bit from all the interventions that we heard. Something that I did pick up is that there's a genuine interest by the private sector to go just beyond this economic focus. You can see that is in the interest of private companies to also have a bigger role on the development opportunities and in the regions and in the places they do operate. So that is very important that we have this sort of like demand by some of these big private firms. The second is that we see that you can really provide some true benefits to local governments and communities. You know, we're not talking about wishful thinking, but, you know, real actions and real resources and services are already being provided. A third part that I see is that there's indeed a greater need of coordination amongst firms, amongst communities and local governments. So we didn't talk too much about the governance side of it, but I think there's scope to work on aligning objectives and strategies and instruments. I think there's still opportunities to develop more synergies amongst the different initiatives, building scale and so forth. From our side, this is the first time that we develop such an event, so it's been quite interesting. I know that our colleagues from our financial affairs director, they've been working with the ESG framework for quite some time, so we will be trying to continue work on this area in cooperation with them. The work that we focused today was on 3 main segments. The first one is on mining, and this initiative that we've been developing for quite some years, the OECD Mining Regions and Cities initiative that Andres mentioned. We have a new initiative around forestry and rural development that is also engaged with big companies with a very important impact on a lot of the rural communities. And then for quite some years, we've had also quite a rich engagement on the topics of Indigenous communities and thinking about ways of how to better deliver opportunities to Indigenous communities, work with Indigenous communities. So I think these are the 3 main areas that we're thinking about moving forward. Just if you continued, you want to have an interest on how we continue, you know, send us an email. We can put you on our mailing list that we send events like this one out systematically. And then if you're also more interested on our next conference around mining, we have one scheduled in the Greater Sudbury city of Northern Ontario in Canada, with a very specific focus on Indigenous communities. We have the pre-conference related to that, but also thinking about the private actors in fostering ESG. So that's going to take place from the 8th to the 11th of October. So if you are interested, feel free to contact myself, Andres, on this one. And just to thank everybody's time. I know we've had interventions from Chile, from Australia, from all around the world. I mean, it's a really thank you for contributing to this event, and we'll have a recording in case anybody wants to to see the recording. Also, please contact us. And with that said, I'll give conclusions to this panel. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.